everyone, and welcome to the first of a three-part series, which I'm going to be running with my colleague Neleta on women's hormones. And we're going to in particular be focusing around the Dutch test because we get so much in the inquiries for it, and we thought we would look at how we use it, what a fantastic tool it is, and that is going to take a long time. In fact, really, it's going to take more than 3 sessions, isn't it, Neleta?
Yes, definitely.
Massive topics that we're going to be going through, but I think we're both agreed. I mean, both Neleta and I, we both work with women's hormones. The bulk of our work actually really is around hormones, quite often from teenage right the way through to the other end of the spectrum at menopause. But it's certainly, using the Dutch test. I mean, what a tool that has become for us.
It's so insightful. Most of the time we're working blind. We sort of go by how we're feeling around our period when we're not on our period. We're going by what sort of the doctors say, but actually it can give us a real insight into where our hormone levels are at, where we need improvement, what could be exuberating some of the symptoms we may be experiencing around our menstrual cycle.
Absolutely. And I think the beauty of the way that we work with hormones, and we're hoping that over the next 3 sessions, some of that will come through, that it's not just about the pill for an ill approach. It's not saying, well, right, here's the test, here's the results, and here's the pill. It's not about that. It's about saying, well, here are the results, but that actually raises more questions than it does answers, because then if something is low or something is imbalanced, we need to know why. What are the dietary factors? What are the lifestyle factors that have led up to that? So by way of an example, I'm going to start with my story, because a lot of you, well, most of you wouldn't know my story with hormones, which began as a teenager when, like many of you, I had the periods from hell. I mean, I had really, really severe period pain, which is known as dysmenorrhea, when it's very, very severe. And I would have these dysmenorrhea attacks, which were very frightening. And that started at the age of 13. And the first one was so bad, we had the GP to the house and she thought it was appendicitis, went into hospital, and of course worked out that it was in fact not just period pain. So I didn't need my appendix out, but I didn't really come away with any answers other than painkillers, and you'll just have to live with it. But when I think about my history, when I did my training and started to realize the factors that cause hormonal imbalance, then I could see how all of those things played a part for me. So the first thing we look at is gut health, which is always a surprise to people, because we detoxify estrogen when we go to the toilet. That's the first or one of the stages. And so at that time I had IBS for years, bloating, IBS attacks as well as dysmenorrhea attacks. Constipation would be a big feature of that. And so you can see how I was unwittingly setting the scene. I was also eating all the very trigger foods that would cause the problem. As a typical teenager, eating too many sweet things. Bread was a big part of my diet as well, which wasn't helping me. And I would have had food sensitivities and not known that. Other things, when we did our training, we learned about those anti-inflammatory things like magnesium and omega-3. Then, my diet was non-existent in terms of omega-3, just about. I mean, we had typical sort of white fish on a Friday, but we didn't have oily fish, and I had never eaten oily fish until I was 26 and I had salmon, oddly enough. And so then I would have been very, very low. And we know that studies have shown that, looking specifically at endometriosis, that in one of the big massive nurses' health studies, which I think was about over 2,000 nurses, they found that those with the highest amount of omega-3 in the diet had the least symptoms, and vice versa. So omega-3 is a big deal when it comes to these inflammatory symptoms across the board, but particularly relevant in period pain. So I would have been low in that. I would have been low in magnesium. I was also a dancer. I would have been sweating a lot because I did ballet, tap and modern for years. And I would have been losing magnesium through sweat. I'd have been losing magnesium through stress as well. I was quite stressed at the time. I was stressed about exams at school. So, I set the scene absolutely perfectly, and I could go on and on. I also had acne as well, for good measure. So, I had all those imbalances going on, but I would have had estrogen dominance. I would have had not enough progesterone. Hence, I had anxiety as well. And you can see the mess that I got into. And it was so amazing doing my training and having those penny drops and thinking, oh my goodness, this is me. No wonder I had those problems. If only I'd known then what I know now, or I'd had a tool like the Dutch test. And I know that you, Neleta, you who work with quite a lot of young girls recently, who were in that boat, or maybe heavy bleeds, painful bleeds, PMS. I had PMS as well, and wondering what on earth's going on. And of course, head to the GP, and really, if you've got painful bleeds, heavy bleeds, irregular bleeds,
there's only one answer.
The pill is the one size fits all. And that's been the case since I was young. That's gone on for years and years and years. But the problem is it doesn't solve the problem.
It just masks the symptoms. And the problem, I'm getting girls as young as 13 and 14 that are coming to me because they've already been to their doctors, and the answer the doctor's giving them is to go on the pill because they're having irregular periods, they're spotting heavy periods, mood swings, low mood, depression, all the things we associate with what we've been told is normal PMS symptoms. But that's not normal for young girls to be experiencing those kind of symptoms. And we're not told any of this stuff when we're learning about the menstrual cycle when we're at school. And we're told very little about menstrual cycle. You've got to think that it's not just those days that we're having a bleed, it's the whole cycle. And women are going through it for years and years and years. And I'm seeing women when they're older and they've been experiencing since they were younger and thinking that's the norm. And then they've just had to deal with it, and a lot of the young girls, for instance, talking about the Dutch test, several of them that I've had have had really low progesterone levels, which obviously accounted for the spotting and the irregular periods, poor sleep. But then that has a knock-on effect. And that's where we have this imbalance with the progesterone and the estrogen. They like to work together. And what they need to do, we need to have that fine balance. And when one's out, that means another one's going to be, in control. And that's estrogen, where we get those estrogen dominance and those symptoms of estrogen dominance. So the heavy periods, the irregular periods. So really is about trying to look at the whole story, the whole picture, rather than focusing on a couple of symptoms and just trying to mask it with a pill.
Absolutely. And it's funny actually, because as you're speaking there, we use that word normal, and of course symptoms can be common, but that doesn't mean they're normal. It doesn't mean they're acceptable, that we have to put up with them. And the other thing is they're not random happenings. There's a reason why we have all those pills, but all those symptoms. And that's where, my own experience is interesting, because I literally ticked every box, in terms of risk factors. I had them all going on and then some. So it's the fact that we can investigate the why. Why are you having irregular periods? What else is going on? Why are you having high stress? Where's that coming from? There's always a why, and actually everybody's why is different. There are multiple whys.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and this is what we find when we look at the Dutch test. We could have two Dutch tests which are very similar in regards to the results, i.e. is the progesterone low, is estrogen high, is testosterone low. They can be very similar, but the triggers for those can be very, very different for each person. Is it stress? Is it work life? Is it the products you're using on your skin? Is it your diet? Are you the processed foods, a lot of nutrient or lacking in nutrients? Those are the kind of things that really play a factor. But also things, I often talk to women that we get told that the gut is a really important part of the body, but actually the liver is a really important organ within the body when it comes to our hormone levels. And women are like, what, the liver? But it really is. And they don't know about this whole detoxification process. When we use our hormones, they have to then be cleared out of the body. but they can't do that if the liver isn't working properly or the gut isn't working properly. So those factors all have to be considered when we look at the results of the Dutch test.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's huge. I mean, the amount of information we have available to us now is just phenomenal. I mean, I wish I had been able to do a Dutch test and a stool test as well when I was a teenager, because my goodness, would that have been interesting. But it would have saved me years of hardship, because I used to live in absolute fear and dread. And just to emphasize how bad it was, I mean, the level of pain, having had 2 babies, I can tell you, is exactly the same, except nobody gives you an epidural for period pain. And it was very frightening, because I would literally collapse on the toilet. I would have to have a chair in front of me because I would be passing out, just about losing consciousness with the pain. And I used to hold on to the chair and lie over it. And I would soak with sweat. I would vomit, I would have horrendous diarrhea, and the pain would come in contractions, just like in labour, where you'd have a few seconds, it would go off and you think, oh, this is great, and you'd start to feel a bit better, and then whoosh, it would come back up again, and it would go right through the whole of my abdomen, into my lower back, and also into my thighs as well. It was absolutely horrific. So yes, my level of fear with, you know, every period wasn't good, but of course fear, stress then exacerbates the whole thing. And I wouldn't get it every month, but I would definitely find that if I was super stressed, that would trigger it. And if I'd been doing a lot of dancing as well, but then I would have been sweating a lot and losing that magnesium, which wouldn't have helped. And I'd have a memory of the day I got my A-level results, that morning waiting for that envelope to come through the door. Then I was actually on the toilet having a dysmenorrhea attack. Surprise, surprise. But that is a powerful example of, if ever there was one, of how stress and fear just drives the whole thing. So yeah, it's wonderful now, really. And I, you know, I love working with families and teenagers, and I know you do too, but it's being able to have those tools available, those information that I just wish I'd had when I was young, because I could have prevented all of that without you know, taking desperate measures, and that's the key thing. And obviously, you know, the pill, I mean, I was offered the pill for 2 months when I did my O levels. I was offered it again for 2 months while I did my A levels. Now they just given out. It's a lot different to what it was in the 1970s, but then yeah, but and then once I was 20, I went on it longer term then, because these things were just, you know, persisting. And while I was at uni, a GP there said, why don't you just stay on it, because there was no other answer at that time. Interestingly, another thing that was offered me, which is still offered to this day, is something called Ponstan, which is a common drug given for period pain. It's a prostaglandin inhibitor. But interestingly, it's the prostaglandins that are involved in the pain. But we have another tool in our toolkit, well, a couple of tools actually, that try and impact those, modulate those prostaglandins. And vitamin E is one of those, isn't it, Neleta? So that's the one that comes up again and again.
Yes, it does. And that's the thing often you see so many women that they see an advert for a particular product or a vitamin and think, oh yeah, that's it, that's going to be what's going to help me. But it's not about one particular nutrient. You know, we've got to work on the whole picture. You know, omega-3 is fantastic. Obviously, it's an anti-inflammatory. And then we're looking at key nutrients for things like liver detoxification, like magnesium, omega-3, healthy fats, those kind of things, those antioxidants. But we have to combine it. You know, it's not just about looking at making sure we have a few of the right foods. We've got to look at the whole picture. What could be driving those? What do we need to incorporate as a lifestyle, rather than it just be a few tablets to take or the pill or something like that?
Yeah, because basically, if we just take the supplement, say, yes, omega-3 is brilliant. Yes, omega-3, magnesium, vitamin E, these are all key ones that we'd use when we're dealing with pain and inflammation. But it's not just about using those, because if we're doing those and we're super stressed and we're eating a high sugar diet and we're not getting adequate sleep and we're drinking too much alcohol and whatever else, plus we're constipated, we've got issues going on in the gut, the liver's not being supported, you know, we're back to finding out the why, and there's no point. You're wasting your money taking supplement after supplement because you've read it online or in a women's magazine, if then those other problems persist. And it's the same when you're taking the pill. If you just take the pill, but you haven't dealt with the constipation and all the other underlying problems, the irony is with the pill, it impacts gut health as well.
Yeah,
and that's the one that surprises. Yeah.
So gut health, but also we know from studies that taking the pill can actually cause nutrient deficiencies in key nutrients that are involved in hormonal balance: magnesium, zinc, B vitamins. And so they are key components when it comes to trying to balance out those hormones. So if we're taking something to help with those symptoms, we're creating an even bigger storm. And that's the problem. And, when I'm talking to especially younger girls, we know that most teenagers' diets aren't going to be the best. I mean, I've got a teenager myself, so I know what the battle is. So we are up against, high sugar foods, processed foods, eating on the go, high stress because of exams, social media pressure, all those kind of things, which obviously culminates. Then even when we look into adulthood, women are working longer hours, family. So food can often be on the go. It can be more highly processed. So adding all of these into the sort of the equation, and a perfect storm for hormonal, that makes it really difficult to try and pinpoint it. So it really is about working out the whole picture.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And of course, it is common. One of the commonest reasons that someone will book in for an appointment with a nutritional therapist is hormonal problems or gut problems. But the interesting thing is they go together. And that's the thing. So even if they think they've booked in for their IBS or their reflux or whatever, chances are we're going to be looking at the hormones as well. Because if you haven't experienced nutritional therapy yet, we don't just deal with one thing. You don't just come with your eczema or your migraine or your IBS or whatever. You come with you. You come with your entire history, your medical history. And so we're trying to unpick all of that story, because what's exciting about the functional medicine model is that it's a systems biology approach, because it draws in all of the body systems. And it's only by understanding all of those interactions and the relevance of all of that biochemistry, really, because there's a domino effect with everything we do. And that's where the food that we eat, the toxins we're exposed to, the drug medications that we take, all of these things impact us at cellular level every second of every day, and actually are constantly, impacting our gene expression.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people say, oh, well, but my mum had period pains, don't they? Or my mum had heavy bleeds. Of course I've got heavy bleeds. But it's actually not about that. I mean, with all things, that there's a little bit of the genetics going on, but there's a fabulous expression we have, which those who know me will have heard me say this before, that the genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. And the environment, well, what's that? It's everything from the day we're born, isn't it? It's were we born by normal delivery? Were we section delivery? Were we breastfed or bottle fed? What happened then? Were we well as a child? Were we constantly
antibiotic?
It's antibiotic after antibiotic. We're a refluxy baby, immediately onto omeprazole and that kind of thing, which again damages the gut, sets the scene for compromised immunity, and then food sensitivities ultimately. And then we develop with, downstream, this whole domino effect, which is just out of control. So it's, it is about taking in that full story and understanding exactly what set the scene. And so, even though, yes, we use tools like the Dutch test, which is great, even before we jump into one of them, we've looked at that entire history and we've seen, that person's, no wonder they're having problems with their gut, because they've had years of antibiotics for, maybe chronic UTIs, maybe tonsillitis, ear infections, lots of things chronically as a child. Maybe they've taken lots of antacids or ended up on omeprazole. So they've had lots of things that have set the scene. Maybe they've had a gut infection or something like that. But, there's lots of things that create that problem, and things that people just live with as normal for them. When it comes to, even gut health, some people think it's normal to go to the toilet once a week, because it's normal for them.
Yeah, and people don't talk about it. We're starting to get freer when it comes to talking about bowel movements and gut health, because it's more, you see it everywhere you go, you know, this is good for gut health, you know, take this probiotic. So that's coming more into the forefront. But then again, we're still quite behind when it comes to women's health. You know, we're still, I mean, things are starting to be talked about more in regards to menopause, but what about the menstrual cycle? Most girls don't understand the whole menstrual cycle as a whole. So actually, when we use the Dutch test, it's quite nice because we spend that hour and a half in the initial consultation and really talk to the client. You know, we find out their history, how they're getting on, their symptoms. And often I find that when I speak to women, they'll start to obviously fill out the form and they'll go, do you know what, I didn't realise that, because they'll start to do other things and they'll go, it didn't really dawn on me that that could be part of it, you know. So they really start to think, oh, actually I have been feeling tired, and yeah, some days I do feel quite low, which is quite unusual for me. So it's find that all in, and then when we get the Dutch test, it's that actually does make sense. We can see how that's impacting you. So this part of your lifestyle, whether that's a big driver or not, let's look at and focus on that, and let's work on ways to improve whatever hormonal imbalance we've encountered.
Yeah. But it's also why, you know, because some very occasionally we'll get an email from someone saying, I'd like to book in for the Dutch test. Well, we can't do that because we've no idea who you are. We don't know your medical history. And unless you're registered with us, we just can't do that. But also we wouldn't want to, because it's not helpful. A Dutch test in and of itself is not helpful. We need to know the context. We need to know the environment. We need to know your entire history. And so we've already unraveled all of that long before you do a test. Plus you have to do the test at a certain point in the cycle. In a normal cycle, it would be days 19 to 21 of a 28-day cycle, let's say. But obviously, if you're not sure of your cycle, then sometimes we have to do ovulation test strips, don't we, Neleta? So that can be really helpful, because obviously we don't spend all that money and then not capture the test at the right time, because it needs to have relevance within that cycle.
And that's the thing, you know, we know we make hormones, but most people don't know at what point we make those hormones within the cycle, and they obviously all have their roles. So when we do the Dutch test, we need to do it at a certain point so that we know whereabouts we're capturing that information. If we take it too early, so if, for instance, we took it, you know, just after our menstrual cycle, sort of day 7, we know that that's not going to give us a good reading of progesterone, because we're not at that point then. You know, it really is about getting that timing right so we can establish where your hormone balance is, and then obviously work from there.
And of course, when we then, you know, go running with that, and thinking, well, sometimes we see that low progesterone and sometimes we see high estrogen. It's all about the relative ratios. It's not just about the numbers per se, or what is within the range or not in the range. It's actually more about ratios and making sure that the balance, to use that word, is right between the two, because when it's not, that can impact so many of the things that we very commonly see, like PMS, period pains, heavy bleeds, clotting, cystic breasts, painful breasts, etc. All of these things that fibroids is another example of that, and of course endometriosis. What are the things that we would see on a test that would show up commonly?
So we do see a lot of, obviously, when the thing is, the body wants to be in a state of balance with anything, whether that's gut health, hormonal balance, neurotransmitter production. So when we look at the Dutch test, we really want to establish what the balance is for you. You know, so if we have really low progesterone, then we know that whether the estrogen is low itself, that's still in a dominant state. So that's the one that's going to be creating those heavy periods, those PMS symptoms, those fibroids, that kind of thing. And then that's going to have a knock-on effect. But we also know that it's not just that. We need to be looking, what I love about the Dutch test is probably my favourite part, actually the cortisol section. And that's the one I find can be a real driver as well, because we know that when it comes to progesterone levels, cortisol is a big influence on that. So when we look at a person that is dealing with high amounts of stress, is in a stressful job, stressful family, exams, anything like that, and we know that cortisol can be elevated in certain situations, we know that that can be a driver for low progesterone, because we actually make it from progesterone cortisol. So the fact that we have to take into consideration all of that and the effect it's then going to have on estrogen and testosterone is a big factor that we need to obviously take into account.
We do. And it's interesting because sometimes, even having had the medical history and all of those notes before you even do this, some people can say, oh, but I'm not stressed.
Yeah.
And then you get some very interesting results, and that then we have lots of interesting conversations. Now, stress, of course, doesn't just come from emotional stress. And that's the thing, that someone can say, well, you know, that I'm fine, genuinely, everything's fine, happy marriage, happy job, blah, blah, blah,
yeah.
Life's good. And they're wondering why they're stressed. But sometimes stress comes for physiological reasons. So that can be multiple nutrient deficiencies. It could be because of impact of drug medication you're on as a side effect. It could be because, again, what we're saying there about estrogen dominance and that lack of progesterone, which impacts stress. So it can work that way as well. So this is, again, why we need the big picture, because then we need to know, well, what is it? What is going on?
Yeah. And the thing is, you've got to think that 150 years ago, women were generally housewives. So there was probably less stress. And 150 years later, our body hasn't evolved to deal with the amount of stress that we have in our lives. You know, we're dealing with longer hours, more demanding jobs, family. We have to have the Instagram worthy life. You know, there's a lot of stuff women have to undergo. And we know that that can then impact on hormonal imbalances. So it really is about trying to get that balance and making sure that whatever stress that we're dealing with is not impacting on our hormones. But we can only do that if we're supporting the body from the inside as well.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that it's interesting now because in every which way, we're setting the scene environmentally for disaster. From food we eat, the stress levels, everything. And you know, again, another thing that's changed is our environmental exposure to xenoestrogens.
Yeah.
And across the board, these are hurting us from the cradle to the grave. You know, that we're that being the toiletries we use, the chemicals under the kitchen sink and in your bathroom cupboard. Stuff that has now grown and grown and grown. In fact, the number of chemicals we're exposed to year on year is increasing. And it's shocking, really. And of course, our body doesn't know the difference between a real estrogen and a pretend one, an estrogen mimic, and that's what these chemicals are. And so now we really do have to choose to make a conscious choice to go for organic moisturizer and organic food and avoid this toxic stuff under the kitchen sink, and instead use hot water and vinegar or lavender or you know, eco-friendly stuff. But we do have to be so careful because our estrogen can be affected by what we eat and what we absorb through our skin.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, there's so much that we have to take in regards to how to support our hormones, and it's finding out what the right thing is for us. And obviously xenoestrogens, we know, play a big factor when it comes to hormonal imbalances, and it can be really difficult to stay clear of them. And it's just trying to find a way that is better for you, that's obviously cost effective as well, because we know obviously everything's a little bit more expensive now, but trying to find ways to incorporate it into the life, into our daily lives, and especially girls as well, because obviously they're just being introduced to moisturizers, makeup, everything else that we're exposed to, you know, BPAs, all those kind of things. So actually starting by talking to young girls, you know, when they come to us, is a really great way to introduce them to, okay, this is the impact they can have on your hormones, stress, you know, all the foods we eat and everything else.
That's right. And I think it's interesting, the cost argument, because ultimately you can save money if you do it right, if you do it cleverly and you understand how things work and you use less of something. You know, quality is better than quantity. So there are ways around these things, but you know, these are basically the things that we look at. Now, again, another example would be someone coming to us with acne. This is a really common, and I know you've had a lot of people who've been to you in the last year with acne.
Yeah.
But that's another one where we're looking through all the whys and wherefores of why that happens. And often that fits with this kind of estrogen dominant theme going on, but there are other factors as well.
Yeah, and that's, it's a bit like a lot of things, it's multifactorial, and that's why we don't just go in with a one size fits all. One person has acne, it must be the same for everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, when it comes to acne, we know that PCOS can be a big driver for that, gut health. So it really is about looking at all those factors that could be influencing that. And the Dutch test is a really good tool when it comes to things like that, because we know with acne that obviously androgenic testosterone can be a really big driver for the symptoms of acne, but also PCOS. So establishing how you're metabolizing testosterone is a really good way of establishing, could this be a possible driver? Is there any other triggers like dairy, poor gut health, constipation, anything like that that could be influencing that?
Yes, absolutely. And as I said before at the beginning, I also had acne, and I definitely was drinking too much milk, and I would have been low in zinc, and I was constipated. I mean, I just had the perfect storm. But of course, people think, oh, it's a topical issue. It's something on the skin. So what goes inside surely is irrelevant to that.
Yeah.
And I can remember, when back in the 70s, doctors saying, oh, is diet anything to do with it? No, not at all. Absolutely, diet is not only relevant, but entirely fundamental. So, we can see these common themes running along with people with acne. But one of the things that's always interesting about acne, again, is, you give the example of PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And that is something that involves hyperandrogenism, so too many of those male sex hormones, which then can drive symptoms like acne, but also for some people it might be facial hair, it might be hair on the body. Now everybody's different, and it's a syndrome, it's a bit of a spectrum. Some people would have both, some people might have one or other, some people might have neither. And for some people, the irregular periods is the main symptom that they would have. But those are the things that we're looking for. And again, because people have never heard of PCOS. I mean, I certainly hadn't heard of it years ago. And, my daughter, who I work with, Harriet, she has PCOS, but she wasn't aware that she had that, interestingly, until she was 24. So her periods up until that point were entirely normal. She had no acne, no hair, nothing like that. Things changed at 24 due to, guess what? Stress. And that is doing a master's degree, and lots of other things that sort of fed into that. But often that can be the time, the thing that flips the switch, if you like, for many of us in our hormone lives. But it's if you're just putting a cream on your skin, and you've got imbalanced hormones, and you've got issues with your gut health, and you're not going to the toilet, and you're not detoxifying properly, etc., then you're just going to create even more problems. And that's where it becomes so interesting for us, so fascinating for us, but also exciting, because we can see these patterns, we can pick up these problems right from day one. If only I'd known right from when I was just a young girl, and I would have been able to solve these sorts of problems. But it's really interesting, the fact that so many things feed into this patchwork quilt, really, when it comes to the hormones. And that's what makes our job so interesting.
Yeah. And when we look at the hormones, it's obviously touching on what I spoke before about the liver, and the fact that plays such a role, because if we don't have a liver that is functioning well, so our liver is sort of the detox hub of the body, it detoxifies, but everything, not just hormones. So, all the chemicals we put on our skin, medication, alcohol, all those kind of things have to go through the liver. And if it's overworked and underpaid, that's my favourite saying, right. Overworked, underpaid, then what we're going to struggle with is actually detoxifying those hormones. It's a bit like somebody waiting in a queue, they're at the back of the queue and they think, I can't wait any longer. So they sort of go back in. And that's pretty the estrogen will do. You know, it gets bored, it's not going to be detoxified, I might as well go back in, and that's when it causes havoc. Because we have several stages when it comes to detoxifying. We have a phase 1 and a phase 2. So we need to make sure that each phase is optimal, to make sure that we're clearing it or detoxifying it nicely so they can go to the gut ready for elimination. So when we look at detoxification, we look at certain nutrients that are really important. So B vitamins, magnesium, healthy fats. And a lot of these are pretty much devoid of most people's diets. You know, we're going more plant-based foods, so B vitamins could be lacking. Magnesium isn't really one that people focus too much on, so not many people have lots of nuts and seeds, leafy greens, pulses, beans, those kind of things. So these key foods that are generally providing these nutrients that our liver needs to function aren't necessarily there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, people may be having other issues going on with the gut, and therefore they're not absorbing those foods, because pulses and nuts and seeds, these can have their own problems in terms of things like phytic acid. You know, it becomes difficult to break down and absorb those foods, so then you're not properly absorbing those nutrients anyway. And particularly if you've got underlying issues with something like SIBO, for example, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, there have been lots of reasons, but you know, if you're not absorbing, it doesn't matter what you're eating at the end of the day, then you're going to have problems. But it's, imagine, you know, if you set that scene, someone's on the pill, which depletes, as we said, the B vits, the magnesium, the zinc, etc., all the very ones we need for hormone health, is the biggest irony of them all. And on top of that, we're also eating a vegetarian vegan diet where we're just not getting adequate amounts of these things, or maybe we are really trying hard and doing well, but we're just not absorbing them for whatever reason, and that's a whole topic for another time. But it's thinking, well, you know, we can easily get into a mess that we didn't intend, and that's the problem. And it's funny because right now, you know, we're just at the end of veganuary, as they call it, this idea that somehow we're going to improve our health and save the world because we eat all this plastic food from the supermarket. Is just ludicrous, because we need a nutrient-dense diet, bottom line. And for hormones, that's really, really important. And of course, it's interesting because we talk about superfoods. And I remember going back to, you know, the 80s when this term was first bandied around in the media. And they were talking in terms of the goji berry as the superfood because it was high in antioxidants. And we'd never heard of antioxidants. Nobody had before then. And but you know, I've since learned that the British blackcurrant, the humble blackcurrant, is higher in antioxidants than the so-called goji berry, which is supposed to be a superfood. But actually, when I did my training, I was staggered to find that the only true superfood, you know, the best superfood, is a liver.
Yeah, liver. I know. And do you know what? Every client I have, when we're looking at sort of those kind of B vitamins, I often say, oh, do you like liver? And most people do turn their nose up. We love liver in our house, so it's a great one. But it is packed full of vitamin A, B vitamins. It's such an amazing superfood. It really is. And it's going to really support that liver detoxification because we need B6 and B12 for those phases to be able to detoxify estrogen. And not getting those necessarily from the foods, because I think a lot of red meat, for instance, has been demonized over the last few years because it's pro-inflammatory and it's bad for the environment. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to make that decision.
Yeah. Whereas it isn't bad for us, and if we have the right kind of it, it's all about farming practice. You know, this is a historical issue and a challenge to do with farming, not to do with the food itself, because there was a time when all vegetables were organic. We didn't have a label that said organic, it just was, and all meat was grass-fed and pastured and all of that, so we didn't have to have things that were labeled to say that. Things have completely changed. So we can't compare, we're not comparing like with like. And obviously a lot of the meats nowadays are not just, they're not grass fed. If you grain fed an animal, you're high in omega-6. And if you've too much omega-6, you're going down that pro-inflammatory pathway versus omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory. So it's back to balance again, isn't it? But it's It's the fact that things have changed. So this is a historic issue, and therefore what we should be saying is actually we need to eat better quality of food and change our farming practice. And when we go organic, then the farming is regenerative. You know, to properly have regenerative, sustainable farming, we need an organic.
You look at one of the most well-studied diets in the world is the Mediterranean diet. And that is one of the best, is because it doesn't eliminate food groups as such. You still have meat in there, but good quality meat. You have fish in there, including a lot of oily fish. And that's one of the most important things. And I think for an island, being the UK, there'd be more fish consumption, which it isn't. You know, we do get a lot of battered fish and that kind of thing. We have a lot of good quality whole grains, and we get good quality vegetables and fruit. So we're gaining that good balance with all of the food, whereas when we're living our busy lives in the UK and we're, you know, trying to get the omega-3 in somewhere, and then we're trying to avoid red meat and trying to have more plant-based, it's quite difficult to try and get that balance within the body.
That's right. And I think, you know, we do need to eat more plants and a variety of plants, because these are the things that keep the good bacteria which we want in the gut. But there's a difference between eating more plants and increasing variety and diversity to then going entirely 100% plant-based. That's a different story altogether, and that brings its own problems.
And that's what I get a lot of people. It's, I do eat vegetables, but we're looking at a very limited amount. And I'm very pro diversity, eat the rainbow, colourful. And if we're limiting it to maybe just broccoli and carrots on your plate, then you're not getting a diversity there. And that's what our gut microbiome really love. They flourish with diversity and all those wonderful nutrients, because each plant's going to be providing a different phytonutrient and antioxidant. So that's what we want to be doing, is creating that wonderful environment for them, because we know that once everything's gone through the liver, it goes back into the gut to then be processed and ready to be eliminated. If we can't eliminate that because we're constipated, or we're only going, you know, a couple of a week, we're going to be really struggling to get rid of that. And that's causing more issues.
Absolutely. And sometimes as well with hormones, we do stool testing, and sometimes that's the first place we go before we do a Dutch test, if there are some particular problems going on. And sometimes we can see that there's a particular enzyme which is assessed there, which is beta-glucuronidase, and that's involved in our liver detoxification. If it's elevated, that can cause problems with our ability to metabolize, break down our estrogen. And that leads to, again, the estrogen recycling that we mentioned before. So we're back to that estrogen dominance coming from the gut health. And again, that can happen at any stage of life, from teenage through to menopause and beyond. So it's again, it's another risk factor. It's a major risk factor. And one of those things that would be a risk factor in terms of estrogen-related cancers, for example, because of estrogen recycling. So it's really important to assess all of these factors. But that's where, again, having that variety and diversity is so important, because it's not just about, you know, in the nutrition game, we have all this Instagram perfect pictures of people green juicing and eating avocado. Everybody has avocado. But if it was that simple. But food is complex, nutrition is complex, because what we're actually talking about is biochemistry and physiology at the end of the day, and looking at all of the things that feed into that we need to be doing, but we're not doing because of historical consequences and all the stuff we're exposed to that has messed us all up, and all the stress that we've got. We haven't even got time or energy to cook a meal. You know, might have fancy ideas of doing all these things, but you don't have to live on mashed avocado and green juice in order to create diversity. The point is that we build up your energy to be able to do these things, and just give you some hints and tips on slowly introducing things over time, so we can start to have fun with food and experiment, try things that we haven't had ever or haven't had for a long time.
And it's never been, and we always work with, it's not about taking things away, it's about including them. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think a lot of people think, oh, if I go to a nutritional therapist, that's it, they're going to tell me I can't have this and this. But it's not about that. It really is about, can we include in your life to support your
Yeah.
What can we do to support your body to make it more resilient to stress? Because we know we can't get rid of stress. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
But we just have to make the body more resilient to it. So what factors can we do to influence that? And it really is about supporting women at every stage. You know, we learn about, the basics of periods when we're at school. But then what about when it comes to pregnancy? And then perimenopause, menopause, and after, there's just no support there. So actually, whether it's just supporting a woman and then with the Dutch test, going through every stage of life.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So yeah, I mean, it's just bliss to have this tool. It really is. I remember when I first learned about the Dutch test, and I just sat there thinking, wow, this is phenomenal, you know, that we have access to all this information. And if somebody took that away from me now, I would cry. Because I just wouldn't like to not know. And I know that the people who make the Dutch test, they have an expression, test, don't guess. And it's such a good one, so impactful, because sometimes we get surprises. And, you know, there's areas out there where, you know, say, for example, endometriosis, where a lot of people could assume that estrogen dominance is the major player there, but it isn't always. Sometimes those things are entirely in balance, and that's not the issue. But then there could be other issues going on. And interestingly, you know, melatonin is an interesting hormone when it's relevant to endometriosis and to our management of symptoms. And there's some interesting studies around that. But again, apart from, so we should say sort of broadly, we won't tell you everything in the Dutch test, could be here all day, but we've got our sex hormones, we've got our stress hormones, we've got our estrogen detox, we've got our a little bit more detail on the adrenal health. We've got our androgens, those male sex hormones. We've then got some organic acid testing, which looks into individual nutrients, neurotransmitters, oxidative stress, and also melatonin, among others, which are a lot. But melatonin is an interesting one because, again, that's produced in the pineal gland. We associate that with sleep. But it's about so much more, isn't it, than just sleep, Neleta?
It is. You know, we're hearing so much about, you know, turn off your phone at night because it can block production of melatonin, but it isn't just our sleep hormone. It's a really potent antioxidant. So often we find melatonin levels do generally decline as we get older, but we do find there are a lot of women that really struggle with production of melatonin, which can then obviously influence other areas of the body because it is such a strong antioxidant. But we also know that it's almost it helps with mitochondria function. So that mitochondria is obviously where we produce our energy in the cells. So we know that that can have an impact on things like energy levels, fatigue, those kind of things. So it's about looking at the whole picture. You know, when we do look at the adrenal glands and then we look at the hormonal balance, where is that melatonin level? You know, we could be really looking at some real severe symptoms of fatigue, and then we look at the chart and we think, oh my goodness, yeah, melatonin is really low. But why is it low? What impact from the environment could be influencing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know what, the advent of the iPhone is probably done us the biggest disservice in terms of hormones. Because, you know, we're on these things scrolling all the time, and they are very addictive for everyone. Even if you try not to, they're very, very addictive. And I think that, you know, the more we can do to set them up to allow a certain number of minutes per day and be aware that blue light effect will suppress melatonin, whether it's coming from your phone, your laptop, or your TVs or whatever. And yes, you can use light blocking spectacle, but I think that, you know, it's better to realize as well, these things are overstimulating. And, you know, when it comes to hormones, we're trying to calm down the stress hormones and boost the melatonin and all of these things. It would be nicer to have, you know, for our children, we're very good at having a nighttime routine. You know, we know that we need to calm them down, get them away from games and TVs, get them in the bath, nice and soothing, maybe a drink, reading their books, because we know that's what you need to have as a routine. So what happened to our routine? Well, iPhones, Netflix. I mean, it's just...
We'll just watch another one. And it's
And
just
they all end on the cliffhanger, don't they? So you think, oh no, they can't possibly leave it there. That's just not fair. And you could literally be there at 5 a.m, still getting to the next cliffhanger if you wanted to.
I think we do everything so well when it comes to foods we eat, you know, the products we put on our skin, not drinking alcohol or whatever it is. But if our sleep is out, we are going to struggle. And that's going to be a big impact on hormonal balance, whether we're eating all the right foods or not. So that is a really big factor when it comes.
It absolutely is.
You know, how well sleeping? Well, I haven't been sleeping that great recently. There's been a lot of stress. So we know stress can play a big factor, or some people could just be light sleepers. Is that because we're struggling with melatonin production?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the phone is the worst one. And I think, you know, for us, I can easily avoid the TV and all that. I don't watch TV. I specifically watch something I want to watch, like a nice movie or something relaxing or something funny. But otherwise, I don't watch TV. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
But the phone is difficult because we've got social media. Somebody might have commented or might have asked a question. You know, you feel obliged to respond, and then, or somebody might have sent an email and Harriet's saying, "Mum, don't check your emails. Ignore them. They can wait for the next day." But I suppose that people pleaser in me makes, oh, well, I'll just check. And you should never do that. You should never, ever, ever be tempted to do that. And, you know, we're all guilty of it. And that's the thing, you know, we're not sitting here that we have all the answers and we're perfect. We're exposed to the same things that you guys are. We have the same ongoing challenges. But I think what we do have, though, is that awareness of, oh, my goodness, this needs to be reined in. This needs to be calmed down. And I think the iPhone has taken us all by surprise, because we didn't know it was going to become so addictive. And, that's a difficult one.
Yeah, and I remember I had one client, this was last year, and when she had lots of energy, she was very chatty, really engaging, you know, and when I said, oh, you know, how are your stress levels? Oh, yeah, fine. We did the Dutch test because there was obviously possible hormonal issues there, and literally her cortisol levels were completely flatlined. She was on overdrive continuously, but her, it was just normal daily life, getting the kids up, feeding them, getting them to school, working, coming home. There wasn't anything for herself. And she said the only time she felt good was when her family had treated her to some spa thing, and she got some real time to relax. And she said that was the first time she'd actually slept well because just been consistently. But to her, it wasn't a stress because it was just everything she had to do. So she didn't see it as stress. And that's often where we fall at the hurdle. We think it's not stress because it's just our daily lives, but actually it's a big stress on the body because there's so much expectation that we've got to obviously live up to every single day, and it can be the body, and then that impacts. So if we're really struggling even to produce cortisol, even if we're producing lots of it, we know we're going to be then impacting on our progesterone, and then obviously that balance between progesterone and estrogen.
Absolutely. Those factors are relevant throughout. And it's funny as you're speaking there, because the last time I did my Dutch test, my adrenals are definitely flatlining. But you know, when I think about the last 6 years in particular, we started the business 6 years ago, which a lot of people know, Nourishing Insights. We started we started it before then, but we started the shop as such 6 years ago in Aberdeen. And so we had a shop and a clinic. My husband was diagnosed with cancer at the time. You know, there was just ongoing stress. And then, of course, the last, you know, few years of craziness, as we all know, I'm not going to use that word, but we'll call it the crazy years. Then, you know, that impacted many people in business. And of course, we had to make some significant shifts there, had some financial worries. And then we had my husband lose his job. And, you know, so all of us have these things. But one of the things that, you know, I can laugh about my flatline is worrying, and I shouldn't laugh about it, but it's the fact that if I didn't do the job I did, if I didn't have the knowledge that I have, I wouldn't have any tools. I mean, I would be in some state by now, and I literally wouldn't be at work. I'd be off school, totally in burnout, and I feel that some days. But I genuinely would, because I wouldn't be taking adaptogen herbs. I wouldn't be supporting all of these things that we've talked about today. I wouldn't be doing my Epsom salt baths at night and avoiding TV, and instead doing a meditation or something like that, or journaling, you know, all these things to support my stress. If I wasn't doing all that stuff, I hate to think the state that I'd be in, and although I laugh and joke about these things, I mean, it really is such a gift, such a privilege to have the training that we have, to have the knowledge we have, because, you know, if I was at this age now and I didn't have all of that, having gone through what we've gone through, my state of health would be very poor indeed. And that's quite scary, really. But yeah, I feel entirely blessed to have that knowledge. And you know, on the subject of melatonin there, we were just finishing up on, just as a nice, interesting fact, is that, because again, you know, we haven't mentioned yet, obviously a lot of people who come to us do have estrogen-related cancer, breast cancer, and they're wanting to assess the hormones. And so we go through all of these things, but it's very common to see breast cancer in night shift workers. And I remember learning about that in my training, and of course in practice, as you and I know and have discussed many times. You know, how many times do we have shift workers, nurses, police ladies coming with breast cancer? And some really interesting studies on that, which just put in perspective a lot of these things we talked about. And one meta-analysis showed 40% more breast cancer in women who were night shift workers. That's 40%, it's quite a lot. And another meta-analysis showed a 44% increase in breast cancer in flight attendants. Now, obviously, if you're a flight attendant, shift work again, but also worse than that, you're crossing time zones.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we know how the effect of that on, you know, just doing it once or twice, but not doing it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I always say knowledge is power when it comes to information, you know, so actually having that information in front of you in black and white to say, okay, that is not right within the body, that's imbalanced. That is such a great gift to know. That's where I need to make the changes. That's where I can focus on. And also it gives us an insight, talking sort of more like the breast cancer, it can give us an insight of the risk factors as well. You know, when we detoxify or metabolize estrogen, we go through several pathways, one being more toxic in regards to increasing the risk of breast cancer. So we can look at those pathways and see if that can possibly be influencing that breast cancer risk.
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, so basically, I think we'll leave it there, because we've given you so many examples actually of the kinds of situations where we are assessing hormones and where we're using the Dutch test. And we're going to talk more about this. We're going to do the next one. We're going to talk about fertility. And one after that, we're going to be talking about menopause. But I hope that's given you a bit of food for thought, a bit of inspiration, encouragement at this point, and hope, because whatever situation they're in, there's always a reason. That's the key. Yeah. That's my motto. There's always a reason. And we are here to find out the reason with you, and to be with you and encourage you and support you. And yeah, get to where we need to go and get those hormones back in balance. And that's the key, back in balance. So thank you, Neleta, for joining us in our first of these hormone sessions. That was really good fun. And we will speak again soon.
Bye.